It's very flattering to be asked to come here today by the IPA. I suspect they have an ulterior motive, which is to say that earlier this year we bought about 500 or 600 books from them and distributed it around our company and around our media agency. And I think they're probably trying to get me to sell books to you as well. So I did a quick calculation on the sort of back of the fag packet upstairs, and I was trying to figure out if there's 400 people in the room and you all buy 500 books each, at 20 quid a pop, that's 4 million quid that we might generate, so fingers crossed. To be honest, I felt like a bit of a fraud when I was asked to do this presentation. I was quite apprehensive about doing it as well, because Adidas is by no means streets ahead when it comes to marketing effectiveness. And that's not a humble brag. I'm not like up here to say, actually we are, because we're not. And over the last few years, we have started to introduce an element of marketing effectiveness. But previously, as an example, about 4 years ago, we didn't have any econometric modeling. Our attribution modeling was based on last click. We didn't do brand tracking. So all of the kind of basics that kind of exist to tell you how much you should invest in marketing didn't exist. So I'm not going to talk to you for 15 minutes like bullshitting about how well we've done as a company. What I'm going to do is kind of be a bit more candid and say, this is what we've been up to. We don't have all the answers. We're trying. We think we're going in the right direction, but we can also be easily misled about some certain metrics. So I thought I'd start by giving you a kind of an overview of the sporting goods industry. It's a $300 billion a year industry, so about half the size of the advertising industry, and it's led by Nike. So Nike has a market share of about 11% globally. Adidas is number 2 in market. Depending on the country, we have around about an 8 to 9% market share. What is or isn't interesting, I guess, is that over the last 5 years, the sporting goods industry has grown by about 8%. And during that time, Adidas has grown by 40%. So we've massively over-indexed. I'll give you a little bit of information about Adidas as well. So we're a 70-year-old company. We actually started in the 1920s, so 20 years before that, by 2 brothers. They fell out. They built this place in a little town in Bavarian Germany called Herzogenaurach. They fell out after a little bit, and they both went their separate ways, and both started a company across the road from each other. And at the time, there was about 5,000 people in this little town. One was Puma, and the other was Adidas. Adidas is a publicly listed company. We have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders to generate profit from their investment. We are worth $60 billion a year. 60 billion in market capitalization. That would be good if it was 60 billion a year. We operate in 150 markets, advertise in 120. We're also set up as a matrix organization. So we have 10 business units, there or thereabouts. They're always changing with restructures. So running, football, originals. And then we have teams, which myself and a couple of colleagues sit in, where we oversee kind of the strategy and the approach of all of that. So we work with all of those business units. And that is actually replicated in the local market as well. So in the US, they replicate that structure. In the UK, they replicate the structure. And it causes friction internally, because what happens is the general managers of each of those business units is tasked with generating sales for their own business unit. They kind of see themselves as their own kind of organization. And that creates a lot of friction, particularly when it comes to messaging, creative, where we're competing against ourselves to drive sales against each other. Back in 2014, our market capitalization was about a quarter of what it is now, so it's about 15 billion. And there were a number of problems that we had. So one was about these business units creating an abundance of product and then not being able to sell them because they didn't have the investment to go behind it. So everything was going on to promotion. That obviously creates price sensitivity because people become accustomed to buying Adidas on sale. We also have a problem with efficiency over effectiveness. So whilst marketing effectiveness is relatively new, we're pretty good at marketing efficiency. We're good at looking at specific KPIs and then how do we reduce the cost. I might say I actually fundamentally disagree with the previous approach for focusing so much on ROI, but I'll come back to that. We also had multiple agencies. So one of the points of this approach to marketing efficiency was about cost cutting. Marketing and media, which is obviously where I look after, was always focused on cost savings. So the previous KPI was just about how do you buy cheaper media. Obviously that can be gamed, you pay the agency crap money, and then therefore you get into this problem where there's no real insight, there's no transparency that's going to tell you what is driving effectiveness. We also had inconsistent measurements. So what is the source of truth? Is it econometrics? Is it attribution? Is it a KPI framework? And then a focus on those misattributed KPIs. Around about the time that I started, 2014, they introduced a new CMO called Eric Lidke. And he'd been with the company for 20 years. And he was tasked with bringing into play a new a new business strategy, which is called Creating the New. And at the center of that was the brand desire. So previously we had been trying to be all things to all people. And what we wanted to do was put our brands front and center of our business strategy. And with that, we believed that we would drive market share, create leverage, and see gross margin expansion across the world. There were three pivotal areas of this back in 2015. So the first was open source. So collaborating with third parties and also with ourselves because there was this internal competition. Key cities, we believe that there's kind of 6 key cities globally that have influence over our sales. They're LA, New York, London, Paris, Shanghai, and Tokyo. And then speed. So nowhere so far have I spoken about the consumer, but this is what it's meant to be about. It's trying to give the consumer what they want and when they want it. Towards the end of 2016, we had a new CEO join. Casper Rorsted, previously at Henkel, incredibly focused on operations. And what he introduced was 4 key accelerators to the business strategy. The first was one Adidas. So again, going back to this point that we were all behaving differently. We had different positionings, different creative, fighting against ourselves. The US. So in terms of the sporting goods industry, the US is the largest in the world. It represents about 30% of total revenue. Portfolio, we had a huge amount of product. So we were about reducing it and trying to increase the price point. And then finally, digital. Now, digital is an interesting one because we sell across wholesale, retail, and e-commerce. Our e-commerce business was introduced in 2010, and it was quite it was quite basic in terms of how it attributed what was driving the revenue. Now, for us, it's the most profitable part of our business because we obviously don't share the revenues with our third parties. However, we had an understanding that it was digital advertising, so desktop and mobile, that was actually driving those sales. And as a consequence, we have probably been over-investing in that particular area. Around the same time, to expand upon creating the new and creating this brand desire, we put into place a new campaign framework. Sorry about the type, by the way. And at the heart of it was emotional brand driving activity, something that we called reasons to believe. So connecting with our consumers over the long term. And with that, we invested significantly 3 or 4 times a year. At the same time, we had something called reasons to buy, which was a concurrent approach or a pulse approach, putting our category advertising out there at the same time, typically with a rational, persuasive message. I mention this because those two are separated in terms of their budget. Separate to that is performance, which is related to e-commerce budgets. Again, going back to digital advertising driving digital sales. And what we found around the same time was that there was a study that was kind of representing what we had thought was the right approach. So the work by Les Bennett and Peter Field has become a huge part of our overall approach at Adidas. And what we saw was that there was this argument to focus on long-term brand building and short-term activation. So that was really interesting, very insightful. We got the same from media in focus and effectiveness in context as well. But one of the key things that we saw and that we were quite interested in was the 60-40 rule. So putting 60% of your investment into brand building, 40% into short-term activation. And obviously, in their latest study, they sort of revised that. But it was very interesting that there was empirical evidence to support what we'd done. And we saw some expected results. So like I said, we put into place econometric modeling around the same time. I'm not sure how well you can see this, but the first chart on the top is looking at e-commerce sales over a year period. And there's stuff that you would kind of expect, stuff that comes from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute of Marketing Science, which is looking at how effective is loyalty in terms of overall sales. Now, the interesting thing is that 60% of our total revenue come from first-time buyers, like people who bought product first time. Yet we are over-indexing internally on CRM and focusing on people that are buying less, but at a higher price point. And when you're trying to grow your company or grow your sales, that limits your ability to drive the sales because there's such a small group of audience. One of the other things that we saw from the econometric modeling was that our business units were not driving their own business unit sales. So although in our mind, we thought those KPIs were set according to what was going to happen, we kind of believed that football was driving football sales. Actually, it wasn't. Football was driving running sales. Running was driving originals. Originals was driving training. And the reason for that is because people aren't in market when we're advertising. Just because we put an ad out there doesn't mean it's going to get an immediate ROI or an immediate sale. What we also saw was that going back to the 60-40 rule, we began to see a pattern in terms of whether this is the right balance or not. So what I've done here is I've broken it out by brand and performance. So brand, emotional driving advertising with category rational messaging, and then performance. And internally, we believe that it's performance driving all of the sales. And we think performance is just driving e-commerce sales. But that's not true at all. So brand is driving 65% of our sales across wholesale, retail, and e-commerce, and yet it has an underinvestment. So if you look at efficiency, brand is underrepresented here. The other interesting thing is that when we advertise e-commerce performance advertising, that is also driving wholesale and retail. It's not just affecting our site. So this was encouraging. We kind of saw that we were splitting our budgets the right way, kind of looked a bit like 60-40, really good. But then when you split the data another way, so again, the way that we budget brand and categories versus performance, what you can see is we're not actually doing the right thing. So in terms of this recommended investment splits of 60-40, we don't do that. We invest 23% in our brand emotional-led advertising, and we push 77% into our performance advertising. And the reason for that is because of short-termism, because we are trying to drive sales very, very quickly. And this is the main reason for it. So this division between attribution and MMM. So we have 4 concurrent attribution models running at the same time. We have a Google last click, Google custom, Adobe, and a Facebook one. And it tells you a very digitally focused story. It tells you that you should be investing in paid search, you should be investing in affiliates, you should be investing in online display. But when you look at econometric modeling, it's telling you something very different. It's telling you that you should be investing in video, which doesn't do very well in last click attribution. That you should be investing in TV, that out of home is driving e-commerce sales, that cinema is driving out e-commerce sales. And it got us to thinking and working with Mediacom on this, because we have a problem internally where we are focusing on the wrong metrics. We are focusing on the short-term delivery because we have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders. So like most other advertisers nowadays, we own our ad tech stack, and we own our ad server, and we can look at short-term measurements in real time. We can look at the ROI or the ROAS straight away, have a look on a dashboard, job done. But actually, when you're thinking about whether it's growing the business, typically it's not. So as an example, if I overinvest in paid search, I'm going to buy things based on ROAS or ROI. That is going to encourage me to buy Adidas terms. So that's someone that is going to our website anyway and is going to buy the product. And we've looked at this. So we accidentally came across this in LATAM. So in LATAM about 2 years ago, Google AdWords broke. And what we found is when Google AdWords broke, we couldn't invest in paid search. But we got a similar amount of traffic and revenue anyway coming from SEO. Now that happened for about 2 days back then. And then about 6 months later, it happened again, but for a week. And the same pattern recurred. Again, we were chasing and investing in a particular channel to drive ROI, but it was sales that we were going to get anyway. So attribution for us is a bit misleading, particularly when someone asks me what is the ROI or the ROAS that I'm going to get from this campaign, because you have so many different models that you can look at. So what we're trying to work on is what is the right model. We think econometric modeling is much better for the long term, but what's been discussed earlier is incrementality, so test and learn. We do this across multiple markets, 7 to be precise. We run ABC tests. So we take the hypotheses that comes from attribution or econometric modeling. We apply a test and then see if it grew any incremental revenue. So going back to the start, I do feel a bit of a fraud. This is not a humble brag. We are just walking. We've got a long way to go. We do overly focus on digital attribution and digital sales, but we are improving. Thank you very much.